abandoned celebrity mansion. You take a look through here. Was the kitchen.
2Pac's old mansion has always held stories, but nothing prepared anyone for what the cops just found beneath it. This discovery surprised investigators and fans alike. Could this secret explain some of the unanswered questions from his last years? What exactly was buried under the mansion? Join us as we reveal how this could change what we know about Tupac's final days. The discovery that reopened old wounds. For years, the old mansion sat behind tall gates, quiet and untouched, as if time had chosen to walk around it instead of through it. The house once belonged to Tupac during the last stretch of his life, a place tied to music, movement, and constant attention. After his death, the property changed hands, but its past never loosened its grip. Neighbors spoke of it in lowered voices, and fans treated it like sacred ground. Nothing about the place felt ordinary, even decades later. On a cool morning in late October of 2025, police arrived without sirens or cameras. The visit was not announced to the public, and it was not framed as part of any reopened case. Officers from a regional property crimes unit were there to assist with a routine inspection tied to a legal transfer issue. Paperwork had flagged irregular records connected to earlier renovations. The task was simple: verify structural changes, document findings, then leave. The officers involved had no expectation of history reaching back up to meet them. The mansion had been searched before, many times, during earlier years when emotions were high and questions were loud. Those searches focused on rooms, closets, and storage areas. They were driven by fear and urgency. This visit was different. Calm replaced tension. Procedure replaced emotion. The goal was not answers, only confirmation. The lead officer reviewed old building plans before stepping inside. According to county files, the house had undergone several undocumented modifications in the late 1990s. Some permits were missing, others appeared altered. That was the reason for the inspection. The city needed clarity, nothing more. Inside, the house felt hollow. The furniture was gone. Walls carried faint marks where pictures once hung. Every step echoed longer than expected. Officers moved slowly, noting ceiling beams, floor levels, and sealed sections that did not match original blueprints. Most of it meant nothing. Old houses often told confusing stories. Then attention turned to the lower level. According to official records, the mansion did not have a full basement. Only a shallow foundation space was listed, but one officer noticed a slight drop in the floor near the rear hallway. It was subtle, easy to miss, but it did not align with the plans. Measurements were taken again. The difference remained. At first, no one reacted. Small inconsistencies were common in older homes. Still, the procedure required documentation. The officer marked the spot and requested access below. When a section of flooring was lifted, the air shifted. It was colder, staler, the kind of air that had not moved in a long time. Silence filled the room. The space beneath was not deep, but it was deliberate. Wood panels covered a reinforced section of concrete. The work looked intentional, not structural. Someone had built it to hide something, not support weight. That realization changed the tone immediately. Calls were made. Supervisors were notified. The inspection paused and transformed into something else. A decision was reached to seal the area until specialists could arrive. What had begun as routine now carried weight. No one said Tupac's names out loud. They did not need to. The house itself said it for them. By mid-afternoon, the property was quietly reclassified. What was once a minor inspection became a protected site. Additional officers arrived, not in force, but in focus. Notes were rewritten, logs were updated. Each action followed protocol, yet everyone sensed the past pressing closer. The mansion had survived years of rumor without yielding anything real. Now, with a single lifted panel, it had broken its silence. The officers understood that whatever rested below had remained hidden for reasons still unknown. If this was only the surface, what exactly had been hidden beneath the mansion all this time? What police actually found. Beneath the mansion, the specialists arrived just after sunrise the next morning, carrying tools meant for careful work, not force. Engineers, forensic officers, and a city structural expert entered the mansion quietly, as if noise alone could disturb what had been sealed away. The house was cleared again, even though it had already been empty. Procedure demanded it. Nothing was assumed, nothing was rushed. The sealed section beneath the floor was opened slowly. Panels were removed one by one. Each layer revealed planning, not decay. This was not damage caused by age. It was designed. Reinforced concrete framed a narrow access point that led downward into a hidden cavity. The space had been intentionally shaped with clean edges and support beams that matched no known renovation record. Someone had gone to effort. Someone had wanted this to last. Lights were lowered into the opening. What they revealed caused the room to fall silent again. The cavity was larger than expected, not a crawl space, not a mistake. It was a concealed chamber built beneath the foundation itself. Dust covered everything, thick and undisturbed. There were no signs of collapse or flooding. The space had remained dry, sealed, and untouched for years. Officers documented every step before entering. Photographs were taken, measurements were recorded. Only after confirmation did two investigators descend carefully. The air was still. It carried no strong smell, only age. Inside the chamber were objects arranged with purpose. Not stacked, not discarded, placed. The first items logged were containers, heavy plastic bins with sealed lids. Some were marked, others were not. All were closed. Nearby sat metal cases, the kind used for equipment, not personal storage. They showed signs of wear but no rust. The chamber had protected them well. A work table stood against the far wall, bolted into the concrete. It was empty, but its presence raised questions no one answered yet. Each item was tagged before being touched. The containers were lifted carefully and moved into controlled light. When the first lid was opened, no one reacted outwardly. Training held them steady. Inside were documents, not papers you would expect in a home. Records, lists, notes written in multiple hands. Dates appeared, names appeared. Some were familiar, some were not. The second container held objects wrapped in cloth. These were not weapons, they were tools, communication devices, old phones, recording equipment, items that suggested activity, not decoration. The kind of things meant to be used briefly, then hidden. Their presence beneath the mansion felt deliberate and unsettling. Specialists were called again. Digital experts examined the devices without powering them on. Forensic analysts assessed the documents for age and origin. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. This was not random storage. This was a holding place, a deliberate one. As more items were cataloged, a pattern began to form. Dates on the documents aligned with the final years of Tupac's life. Some entries stopped abruptly. Others continued past his death. That detail shifted the atmosphere. The room grew heavier, though no one spoke about it yet. By late afternoon, the site commander ordered a pause. Too many implications were forming too quickly. Evidence was sealed and transported under escort to a secure facility. The chamber was closed again, guarded now, no longer forgotten. Reports were sent up the chain, each carefully worded. What shocked investigators was not just what was found, but how long it had remained hidden. This space had survived renovations, ownership changes, and previous searches. It had stayed silent through years of speculation. That silence felt intentional. As officers left the mansion that evening, one thought followed them all. If these items were hidden with such care, what questions were they meant to delay answering? And if these discoveries point toward the final years of 2Pac's life, what truths have been waiting all this time to surface? Why this mansion was always different. The mansion had never been just a place to sleep. When 2Pac first moved in, it marked a shift in how he lived and how he thought. Before that house, his life moved fast and loose, shaped by tours, studios, and temporary spaces. This property was different because it offered control. It sat behind gates, away from crowds, and gave him distance from noise he could no longer manage. To 2Pac, distance meant safety, and safety had become rare. The house arrived during a tense chapter of his life. Pressure followed him everywhere by then. Fame had grown heavy, and trust had grown thin. People came with smiles and left with questions. The mansion became a filter. Not everyone was allowed in. Those who entered were noticed, remembered, and measured by how they behaved once inside. The walls heard conversations that never reached the outside world. Behind closed doors, the mansion became a planning space. Meetings happened late at night. Music was discussed, but so were risks and moves. 2Pac used the house to think, not hide. He paced rooms, argued with friends, and tested ideas out loud. He needed places where his voice could rise without consequence. This home gave him that freedom. Visitors came in patterns. Some arrived often and stayed long. Others appeared once and were never seen again. Industry figures, friends from earlier years, and people with unclear roles passed through the gate. Staff noticed the flow change over time. Early visits felt open and hopeful. Later visits carried tension, marked by shorter stays and guarded tones. The mansion also held emotional weight. Tupac had always carried his past close, and the house reflected that. He filled rooms with reminders of where he came from and what he believed. Art mattered, words mattered, silence mattered most. There were days when no one entered at all. Those days followed hard nights or troubling news. The house absorbed those moods quietly. Security tightened as months passed. Cameras were added. Routes were changed. Even trusted faces noticed new rules. This was not paranoia. It was a reaction. Tupac had learned that danger rarely announced itself. The mansion became a place where he could decide who stood near him and who stayed outside. Control brought comfort, even if brief. There were also moments of calm inside those walls. Laughter happened there. Music played late into the morning. Friends remembered meals that stretched into hours, filled with talk that wandered far from fame. Those moments mattered because they were fragile. They existed beside fear, not instead of it. The property mattered because it held contradictions. It was both a shelter and a stage. It protected him while also concentrating attention. What happened there shaped choices he would make later. Plans discussed in those rooms influenced paths taken beyond the gate. The house did not cause events, but it framed them. Looking back, investigators would later note how often key decisions seemed to trace back to that address. Not because of secrets alone, but because of timing. The mansion became the place where Tupac tried to slow a life that refused to pause. It was where he gathered strength and where doubt crept in quietly. Nothing about the house felt accidental. It reflected a man trying to hold control during a volatile time. That is why the space beneath it would later feel so charged. The foundation carried more than weight. It carried intention. If this mansion shaped his final choices, what was it meant to protect that still has not been fully understood? The quiet decisions made after the discovery. The discovery did not lead to noise or panic the way many expected. It led to silence, careful steps, and rooms filled with people who spoke softly. The first meetings happened behind closed doors, far from cameras and far from questions. Chairs were pulled close. Files were opened slowly. Every word was weighed before it was spoken. This was not about speed. It was about control and timing. Some people believed the next move should be clear and public. Others argued that the truth needed protection first. They said the situation was delicate and could easily break apart. There were details that felt unfinished and pieces that did not yet fit together. Sharing too much too soon could cause damage that could not be undone. So they paused and listened instead of acting. Information was placed into layers. One layer stayed close, seen only by a few trusted hands. Another layer was marked for review and sent higher up the chain. The language used was careful and calm. Nothing was written in sharp terms. Nothing pointed fingers. Everything stayed neutral, even when emotions were strong. That choice was not accidental. It was designed. Federal officials were briefed in quiet rooms with sealed doors. They asked questions that were slow and deep. They wanted timelines, access points, and past records. They did not rush to conclusions. They asked for patience while they examined what could be confirmed. Local authorities waited, even when waiting felt uncomfortable. Everyone understood that one wrong move could change the story forever. Outside those rooms, the world kept moving. People talked without knowing the full picture. Rumors filled the empty spaces left by silence. Yet inside, restraint ruled every decision. Press statements were drafted and rewritten many times. Words were removed more often than they were added. The goal was not to hide the truth, but to avoid shaping it too early. Some findings were labeled sensitive and placed aside, not because they were false, but because they needed context. Other details were pushed forward for deeper review. Each choice followed rules that had existed long before this moment. Still, the question lingered. Why did some facts remain sealed while others moved ahead? The answer depended on who was asking and why. The mood inside those meetings felt heavy but steady. No one raised their voice. No one rushed out of the room. It was clear that history was watching, even if it could not yet see. Every pause mattered. Every delay carried meaning. They were not buying time. They were shaping the order of truth. There were moments when silence felt louder than action. A file left unopened. A call not returned yet. A statement delayed until morning. These were not mistakes. They were choices made with care. The people involved understood how fast stories could turn and how slow trust could rebuild. Some believed the public deserved everything at once. Others believed clarity came from order, not speed. That tension sat in the room without being spoken. It shaped faces and posture. It guided hands as they turned pages. The decisions were quiet, but they carried weight far beyond those walls. As days passed, nothing seemed to change on the surface. No arrests were announced, no new facts were shared, yet inside, lines were being drawn and paths were being chosen. The story was not frozen. It was being prepared. When the meetings ended each night, the rooms were left clean and empty. Lights went off, doors locked, the silence returned. But one question remained, hanging in the air where no one could hear it. What was being protected by waiting, and what would happen when the waiting finally stopped? How this connects to 2Pac's final days. The discovery beneath the mansion did not exist in a vacuum, and investigators knew that right away. Once the first reports were written and the site was secured, attention quietly shifted toward timelines that had been studied for decades. Movements that once felt settled were reopened with fresh eyes. Not because of rumors or pressure, but because physical evidence has a way of forcing honesty where memory often fails. 2Pac's final days had always been mapped out in public records, interviews, and court files. Where he went, who he met, and how quickly events unfolded were treated as known facts. Yet, as officers reviewed what was found beneath the property, they noticed overlaps that had never been placed side by side before. Certain dates aligned too closely to ignore. Certain gaps now felt heavier than they once did. Investigators began with travel logs and security notes tied to the mansion. These were not dramatic documents. They were simple records, often overlooked because nothing seemed wrong at the time. Now those same records gained weight. They showed patterns of movement that raised new questions about preparation and awareness during his final months. Nothing pointed to guilt or blame. It simply showed planning where chaos was once assumed. Attention then turned to people who passed through the house during that period. Not names meant for headlines, but support staff, visitors, and associates who had been present without much notice. Their timelines were compared with studio sessions, legal meetings, and public appearances. Some overlaps felt ordinary, others felt unfinished. Investigators did not draw conclusions. They highlighted inconsistencies and marked them for review. The most delicate part involved communication. Phones, notes, and informal messages from that era had always been incomplete. Many were lost or destroyed over time. What was uncovered beneath the mansion suggested that some information may have been intentionally set aside, not hidden for crime, but preserved for reasons never explained. That possibility alone was enough to reopen old assumptions. Officials also revisited the final week before his death. Each day was reviewed slowly. Where he slept, where he rested, and where decisions were made were all placed on a single timeline. When that timeline was laid beside the discovery, new proximity emerged. Locations once seen as separate now appeared connected by purpose rather than chance. This did not mean answers appeared overnight. In fact, the opposite happened. The more evidence was reviewed, the clearer it became that some early conclusions may have been shaped by urgency instead of completeness. Investigators acknowledged that pressure at the time had narrowed focus. Now, decades later, they had space to widen it again. Emotional weight entered the process, but language stayed careful. No one spoke of rewriting history. They spoke of refining it. The goal was not to change what happened, but to understand what had been missed. Even small details, like timing between meetings or unexplained pauses in schedules, were now treated with respect. One investigator described the feeling as standing in a familiar room and noticing a door that had always been there but never opened. The discovery beneath the mansion did not provide final answers. It provided permission to ask better questions. Questions that had once felt uncomfortable now felt necessary. As files were reopened and timelines adjusted, a quiet realization settled in. The final days of Tupac's life were not as fully understood as many believed. The discovery was not accused, it connected, and those connections made silence harder to maintain. If these links were missed before, what else had been waiting quietly in plain sight all this time? The reaction from those closest to his legacy. News of the discovery did not spread quickly to the public, but it moved carefully through a smaller circle first. Family members, estate representatives, and longtime associates were informed in private settings. There were no cameras and no statements prepared in advance. The goal was respect, not reaction. For some, the news landed like a weight, finally given a name. They had lived with unanswered questions for years, learning to accept uncertainty as part of daily life. Hearing that something new had surfaced brought mixed feelings. There was relief, but also exhaustion. Old memories returned without warning, and not all of them were gentle. Others responded with quiet validation. They did not appear surprised. Instead, they nodded and asked careful questions. These were people who had always believed pieces were missing. They had spoken softly about it for years, often dismissed as emotional or protective. Now, the discovery suggested their instincts were not misplaced. Estate representatives focused on the process. Their concern was how information would be handled and who would control the narrative. They requested clarity, not secrecy. They wanted to ensure that whatever emerged would be accurate and grounded, not shaped by speculation or noise. Their role was preservation, not publicity. Close friends reacted differently. Some withdrew and asked for time. Others shared memories they had not spoken about in years. Moments from the mansion resurfaced in conversation. Small details, like locked rooms or sudden schedule changes, returned with new meaning. None of it was offered as proof. It was offered as context. The emotional impact was visible but restrained. There were no confrontations and no accusations. Instead, there was a shared understanding that history had shifted slightly. Not enough to overturn everything, but enough to demand attention. Silence, once a form of protection, now felt heavier to maintain. One family member described the feeling as reopening a book that had been closed before the final chapter. They did not know what they would find, but they knew it mattered. The discovery beneath the mansion had touched something deeper than evidence. It touched my memory. Associates who had built their lives around his legacy expressed concern for balance. They feared the story could be taken from their hands and reshaped by outside voices. At the same time, they understood the importance of truth. Living with unanswered questions had shaped their choices for decades. Throughout these conversations, one theme repeated quietly. The desire was not for drama, it was for understanding. The people closest to his legacy were not looking to reopen wounds for attention. They wanted closure, even if it came slowly and without certainty. As officials prepared next steps, those closest waited, not with impatience, but with guarded hope. They had seen headlines rise and fall before. This time felt different. This time involved something real, something physical, something that could not be brushed aside. If those who carried his memory feel this shift so deeply, how will the world respond when the full truth finally steps into the light? Why this changes the story moving forward. When the last reports were filed and the mansion was sealed again, something quiet but permanent had changed. The building itself still stood, walls unchanged and gates still closed, yet its meaning had shifted. What was once treated as a chapter from the past had stepped back into the present. The discovery beneath the structure did not end a story. It reopened one that many believed was finished. For investigators, this moment altered how the case would be approached moving forward. Not because a final answer had been found, but because the limits of the past investigation were now visible. Old files were no longer treated as complete. They became living records again, open to review and correction. The discovery forced a wider view, one that allowed room for patience instead of urgency. Public understanding also began to change, though slowly and carefully. For years, the story of Tupac's final days had been shaped by repetition. The same details were shared again and again until they felt settled. This discovery disrupted that comfort. It reminded people that history is often written under pressure, and pressure does not always allow for depth. The mansion became a symbol of that truth. It was no longer just a place where a famous artist once lived. It became proof that physical spaces can carry unanswered questions long after people move on. What lay beneath it was not only material, it was time, silence, and decisions that were never fully explained. For his legacy, The impact was deeply layered. 2Pac had always been understood as complex, emotional, and forward-thinking. His music reflected struggle, hope, and conflict all at once. The discovery beneath the mansion did not change who he was. It changed how his final chapter is viewed. It added weight to the idea that his life was still unfolding in ways unseen. Those who study his work began to look differently at certain lyrics and interviews, not to force meaning where none existed, but to consider context. Words once seen as metaphor now felt closer to lived experience. The mansion, once just a backdrop, became part of that context. It was a place where emotion and strategy met, where personal life and public pressure overlapped. Investigations moving forward will likely be slower and more cautious. Authorities understand that trust depends on restraint. This discovery taught them that rushing to conclusions creates blind spots. By choosing patience, they allow space for truth to surface without force. That approach doesn't promise answers. It promises care. For the public, this moment challenges a common desire for closure. Many want stories to end cleanly, with clear lessons and final statements. Yet some stories resist that shape. They remain open because the people involved were still becoming when their lives ended. 2Pac's story is one of those. The mansion now stands as a reminder of that reality. It is no longer frozen in memory as it once was. Every room feels closer to the present. Every shadow carries questions that were once ignored. The discovery beneath it ensures that it will never return to being just a footnote. There is also a lesson in how long this truth remained hidden. It speaks to how easily important details can be buried, not always by intention, but by time and distraction. Decades passed while the world moved forward, assuming everything worth knowing had already been found. The discovery proves that assumption wrong. This does not mean the story will suddenly change overnight. Progress will be measured and careful. Files will be reviewed. Statements will be weighed. Silence will still play a role. But the direction has shifted. The story now moves forward instead of resting in place. For those closest to his legacy, this moment is both heavy and grounding. It confirms that their patience mattered. Those questions asked quietly still carried the truth. It does not erase pain, but it gives it shape. Knowing that the past is being examined with honesty brings a different kind of peace. For future generations, the discovery offers something rare. It shows that history is not fixed. It evolves when new facts emerge. It teaches that respect for the truth sometimes means admitting what was missed. That lesson extends beyond this case. It applies to how all stories are told. The mansion, once silent, now carries a new responsibility. It stands as a place where the past was interrupted by truth, where something hidden refused to stay buried. Its walls now hold a story that continues to unfold, not in noise, but in careful steps. As time moves on, the discovery will likely become part of a larger understanding, not as a shocking headline, but as a turning point. A moment when restraint replaced assumption. When patience replaced urgency. When listening mattered more than speaking. The story of 2Pac does not end here. It widens. It deepens. It reminds us that some lives leave questions because they matter deeply. That some truths wait not for attention, but for readiness. The mansion remains, changed forever by what lay beneath it. And as its gates stay closed and its rooms sit quiet, one question lingers, steady and unresolved, waiting for the next chapter to begin. If this story is still unfolding now, how much of the past have we yet to truly understand?